Avenue.
This is CNN.
Storm clouds swirl outside this majestically lit United States Capitol. What began as a balmy evening here has turned into a typically frigid, rainy January night.
And a tempest may also be brewing inside as President Clinton reflects on a momentous first year in office and sets an ambitious agenda for 1994. This is a CNN special, President Clinton's first State of the Union address. Good evening from Washington. I'm Judy Woodruff.
And I'm Bernard Shaw. Bill Clinton likes to be known as a man of policy, willing to take on the issues, quick to delve into the details. And after combing through his programs, writing and rewriting, the president lays it all out for the American people.
The word from the White House is that this State of the Union message will be devoted primarily to the domestic issues that concern Americans the most: crime, welfare, health care, and the steadily growing U.S. economy. For a preview, we go first to CNN senior White House correspondent Wolf Blitzer. Wolf?
Judy, the president will begin the speech tonight by stressing his accomplishments this past year, specifically on the economy. He will take credit for some of the low budget numbers, the reduced deficit. Certainly, he will try to take credit for the low inflation rate and the low interest rates. But he will move quickly to the centerpiece of what is his administration's major initiative during the second year in office, namely health care reform. And he will insist that the country needs universal coverage, health care for everyone, affordable health care no one can take away. He will also stress a more popular issue right now, which namely is crime. And specifically, he will endorse the notion 3 strikes and you're out, meaning 3 violent felonies and you're never again going to be eligible for parole. On welfare reform, the president will insist that the country must end welfare, in his words, as we know it, and he will stipulate that for most welfare recipients, 2 years will be the limit. Finally, there will be a section on national security, international affairs. The president will try to stress how he's worked to promote democracy around the world, in Russia, in Central Europe, Eastern Europe. He will point to a democracy emerging in South Africa, the Arab-Israeli peace process. There won't be any discussion, though, of some of the foreign policy failures, Bosnia, Somalia, Haiti. Judy?
All right, thanks, Wolf. And we want you to continue to stand by, and we want to bring in Bob Franken, CNN's Capitol Hill correspondent. Bob, what are the members that you've been talking to expecting to hear tonight?
Well, first of all, what they're expecting to hear is a bit of self-congratulation. They really had, by the time the year was over, a fairly productive year last year. It was capped, of course, by the NAFTA success for the president. And then even as the session was closing, he was successful in getting the Brady bill. You'll remember that, of course. Now he's moving on to the big ones, and that, of course, is highlighted, as Wolf said, by health care. That is everybody's priority up here this year. This is an election year, and basically everybody has decided that the election, their election, the success of each party is going to depend on how they handle the health care issue. Of course, there's a Clinton health care proposal. There are a variety of other proposals. Remember, probably the most serious competitor to the Clinton health care proposal comes from a Democrat. Actually, it's a coalition of conservative Democrats and Republicans. It's the Jim Cooper health care plan, which, as I said, is probably the most serious competitor to health care. The other issue that has forced its way to the forefront is crime. Both parties are going to be trying to outdo each other to look tough on crime. The problem is there are really a variety of proposals out there and a variety of philosophies about what to do about crime. There are those who want to emphasize punishment. There are those who would like to emphasize rehabilitation and the social issues. So crime and health care are going to be the 2 things which the members probably feel that they're going to have to do something about this year. As we can see, the chamber is filling slowly as they get ready for the president to deliver his State of the Union address. We are hearing that the president might be a little late. We're not exactly sure of the reason, but this is really quite a massive event. When the Capitol becomes swarming with police, you have just about every dignitary in the Western world, it seems, going into one room. That is the House of Representatives chamber. We're expecting now to hear about a 1-hour address. Then we'll begin, which should be a long, long congressional session, really focusing mainly on 2 issues, as I said, health care and crime.
All right, thanks, Bob Franken, and we know you'll be standing by, too. And I guess, Bernie, what we're also hearing is that some of the delay that may happen right now has to do with difficulty in getting people into the chamber and taking their seats. There is some rough weather outside here.
Rough weather indeed, Judy. And for all of our viewers, as you know, in our coverage of the State of the Union addresses, normally we talk for a little while and go right to the president. As Judy indicated, this chamber is slow to fill up tonight. It's yucky outside, to be quite blunt about it. And these guests are in the gallery, left-hand side of your screen. Lane Kirkland, president of the AFL, the CIO, and that's very interesting that he's there. We're going to call in our public opinion analyst, Bill Schneider, and as we do, we'll tell you the president is on time. He's in a holding room. They're waiting for the chamber to fill up. Bill, there's an interesting battle going on in this Capitol tonight. It seems to be a battle for the minds and the support of the American voters.
Well, that's right, and I think we're going to hear the president veer between one message in which he points with pride towards all of his achievements. The other message is that he views with alarm all the problems we have out there. He's going to have to seek a balance between those two messages. He wants to point with pride to say it's working. The program is in place. We have to stay the course, to quote Ronald Reagan, which I don't think he will do, and continue the program that we've set. He wants to view with alarm because he still has a big agenda, health care, welfare reform, and he wants to make a lot of changes. So he has to say, we can't be complacent. There's still a lot of changes we need to make.
Can you tell us very briefly, Bill Schneider, why is it that the message health care reform we heard as Congress went out is a different message we're hearing as we come in?
Well, at the moment, the health...
Mr. Speaker, the Chief Justice of the United States and the Associate Justice of the Supreme Court.
We're going to hear some announcements, formal announcements of very important personages as they file into this chamber, and that the Supreme Court is just being announced by the House doorkeeper. Bill indicates that we are some time away from hearing him say, Mr. Speaker, the President of the United States.
That's right. The Supreme Court is gathering. In fact, the entire government, that's all three branches of government, the Congress, the Supreme Court, the President, are all in one room. This is a rare occasion, once a year in American government. You were asking me before about the health care issue. It has changed its texture a bit in the 9 weeks since Congress went into recess. Health care last year was clearly a major crisis. It was one of the top issues facing the country. And in the last 9 or 10 weeks, I think the sense of crisis has diminished. There's a feeling of less pressure on Congress. Two reasons. One is that the figures came out showing that inflation in healthcare costs is lower than it's been in 2 decades. So the situation is improving. And second of all, the economy seems to be recovering. The news from the last economic quarter was quite good. It was the recession of 1990 and 91 that created the healthcare crisis, because so many Americans, particularly white-collar workers, were threatened with losing their jobs and their health care. And now that there seems to be a recovery moving ahead, the sense of crisis is diminishing, and the president needs to recreate that if he wants to get his health care plan passed.
All right, Bernie and I are just hearing that the president, who has been in a holding room just next to this chamber, is leaving the holding room and is now making his way to the chamber. And in a moment, we're going to hear, I think it's the Sergeant at Arms, is that right? Mm-hmm. Whose name is Werner Brandt, who's going to announce that the president is coming in. And all of this very much follows tradition for these joint sessions of Congress, which the president speaks at. As we've pointed out, this is the president's first formal State of the Union address, but he did speak to 2 joint sessions of Congress last year, one in February when he laid out his economic plan for the year, and the second one in September when he talked about health care. We think the announcement is about to come.
And as we await the announcement by the Sergeant at Arms announcing the President of the United States, always one member of the cabinet stays back, just in case, God forbid, there's something catastrophic that might happen in this chamber.
We should mention that this is a constitutional requirement. The Constitution says
Mr. Speaker,
that the president has to deliver.
The President of the United States.
still here. You're still here. I think we just were here. I think we just got back.
How are you? Missed you the last time.
This guy will work the crowd.
Bill Schneider, why does this president feel that he, as a Democrat, has got to show the Republicans that he and his party are just as tough on crime as the Republicans?
Well, crime is the #1 issue facing the country. The Republicans think that the issue is a gift to them because they've always seen themselves as the tough on crime party. But Clinton has really tried to preempt this issue with some success. He supports the death penalty. Many Democrats, like Michael Dukakis, did not. He is for boot camps for first-time offenders. A lot of Democrats have gone out of their way to prove that they're new Democrats, like President Clinton. They take a different line, not the conventional liberal line on issues like crime, and they are stealing the issue right from under the Republicans' noses.
And the Republicans are not very happy about that.
No, indeed. In fact, one of them, Senator Phil Gramm, said the president's a phony on crime the other day.
We're going to hear the Speaker of the House formally announce the president to this chamber. At some point, you might see in the gallery, sitting next to First Lady Hillary Rodham Clinton, Tommy O'Neill. He's the eldest son of the former and late Speaker Thomas Tip O'Neill, who, as you know, died.
He's also a former Lieutenant Governor of Massachusetts.
That's sitting there. Bernie was pointing out that next to Mrs. Clinton, Lane Kirkland, who's the head of the AFL-CIO, on her other side is the CEO of General Motors, Jack Smith.
And the diplomatic corps is seated to, let me see if I can remember quickly, to the president's left on the floor of the House chamber. They always are along the wall, right here in the foreground here, if my angle is correct here. They're right there, just to the left of the CNN logo there.
It's interesting that Lane Kirkland is there in the gallery with the First Lady because the organized labor constituency was very angry over NAFTA just a couple of months ago, but they support the president on health care, and Lane Kirkland is very prominently in attendance tonight. Maybe they're ready to bury the hatchet.
Someone else who's prominently in attendance, Jim Brady, former press secretary to Ronald Reagan, who of course was shot the day President Reagan was shot. Jim Brady has been instrumental, he and his wife Sarah, in pushing through the handgun reform legislation we all know well now by the name the Brady Bill.
This is going to be a long one tonight.
Thank you very much.
Members of Congress, I have the high privilege and the distinct honor of presenting to you the President of the United States.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, Judy and Bill, clearly this president is anxious to go. He almost started his speech before he was introduced formally by the Speaker of the House.
Bill and Bernie, has a president ever come into that chamber and not been profusely applauded?
I can't remember. Many presidents who have been in a lot of trouble, and several recent ones were.
And the party that has the control of the White House yells loudest.
Thank you very much. Mr. Speaker, Mr. President, members of the 103rd Congress, my fellow Americans, I'm not at all sure what speech is in the teleprompter tonight, but I hope we can talk about the State of the Union. I ask you to begin by recalling the memory of the giant who presided over this chamber with such force and grace. Tip O'Neill liked to call himself a man of the House, and he surely was that. But even more, he was a man of the people, a bricklayer's son who helped to build the great American middle class. Tip O'Neill never forgot who he was, where he came from, or who sent him here. Tonight he's smiling down on us for the first time from the Lord's gallery. But in his honor, may we too always remember who we are, where we come from, and who sent us here. If we do that, we will return over and over again to the principle that if we simply give ordinary people equal opportunity, quality education, and a fair shot at the American dream, they will do extraordinary things. We gather tonight in a world of changes so profound and rapid that all nations are tested. Our American heritage has always been to master such change, to use it to expand opportunity at home and our leadership abroad. But for too long, and in too many ways, that heritage was abandoned and our country drifted. For 30 years, family life in America has been breaking down. For 20 years, the wages of working people have been stagnant or declining. For the 12 years of trickle-down economics, we built a false prosperity on a hollow base as our national debt quadrupled. From 1989 to 1992, we experienced the slowest growth in a half-century. For too many families, even when both parents were working, the American dream has been slipping away. In 1992, the American people demanded that we change. A year ago, I asked all of you to join me in accepting responsibility for the future of our country. Well, we did. We replaced drift and deadlock with renewal and reform. And I want to thank every one of you here who heard the American people, who broke gridlock, who gave them the most successful teamwork between a president and a Congress in 30 years. This Congress produced a budget that cut the deficit by $500 billion, cut spending and raised income taxes on only the wealthiest Americans. This Congress produced tax relief for millions of low-income workers to reward work over welfare. It produced NAFTA. It produced the Brady Bill, now the Brady Law. And thank you, Jim Brady, for being here. And God bless you, sir. This Congress produced tax cuts to reduce the taxes of 9 out of 10 small businesses who use the money to invest more and create more jobs. It produced more research and treatment for AIDS, more childhood immunizations, more support for women's health research, more affordable college loans for the middle class, a new national service program for those who want to give something back to their country and their communities for higher education, a dramatic increase in high-tech investments to move us from a defense to a domestic high-tech economy. This Congress produced a new law, the motor voter bill, to help millions of people register to vote. It produced family and medical leave, all passed, all signed into law with not one single veto. These accomplishments were all commitments I made when I sought this office, and in fairness, they all had to be passed by you and this Congress. But I am persuaded that the real credit belongs to the people who sent us here, who pay our salaries, who hold our feet to the fire. But what we do here is really beginning to change lives. Let me just give you one example. I will never forget what the family and medical leave law meant to just one father I met early one Sunday morning in the White House. It was unusual to see a family there touring early Sunday morning, but he had his wife and his 3 children there, one of them in a wheelchair. I came up, and after we had our picture taken and had a little visit, I was walking off, and that man grabbed me by the arm, and he said, "Mr. President, let me tell you something. My little girl here is desperately ill. She's probably not going to make it. But because of the family leave law, I was able to take time off to spend with her, the most important time I ever spent in my life, without losing my job and hurting the rest of my family. It means more to me than I will ever be able to say. Don't you people up here ever think what you do doesn't make a difference. It does." Though we are making a difference, our work has just begun. Many Americans still haven't felt the impact of what we've done. The recovery still hasn't touched every community or created enough jobs. Incomes are still stagnant. There's still too much violence and not enough hope in too many places. Abroad, the young democracies we are strongly supporting still face very difficult times and look to us for leadership. And so tonight, let us resolve to continue the journey of renewal, to create more and better jobs, to guarantee health security for all, to reward welfare, work over welfare, to promote democracy abroad, and to begin to reclaim our streets from violent crime and drugs and gangs, to renew our own American community. Last year, we began to put our house in order by tackling the budget deficit that was driving us toward bankruptcy. We cut $255 billion in spending, including entitlements, and over 340 separate budget items. We froze domestic spending and used honest budget numbers. Led by the Vice President, we launched a campaign to reinvent government. We cut staff, cut perks, even trimmed the fleet of federal limousines. After years of leaders whose rhetoric attacked bureaucracy but whose actions expanded it, we will actually reduce it by 252,000 people over the next 5 years. By the time we have finished, the federal bureaucracy will be at its lowest point in 30 years. Because the deficit was so large, and because they benefited from tax cuts in the 1980s, we did ask the wealthiest Americans to pay more to reduce the deficit. So on April the 15th, the American people will discover the truth about what we did last year on taxes. Only the top 1.2% of Americans, as I said all along, will pay higher income tax rates. Let me repeat. Only the wealthiest 1.2% of Americans will face higher income tax rates, and no one else will, and that is the truth. Of course, there were, as there always are in politics, naysayers who said this plan wouldn't work, but they were wrong. When I became president, the experts predicted that next year's deficit would be $300 billion. But because we acted, those same people now say the deficit's going to be under $180 billion, 40% lower than was previously predicted. Our economic program has helped to produce the lowest core inflation rate and the lowest interest rates in 20 years. And because those interest rates are down, business investment in equipment is growing at 7 times the rate of the previous 4 years. Auto sales are way up. Home sales at a record high. Millions of Americans have refinanced their homes, and our economy has produced 1.6 million private sector jobs in 1993, more than were created in the previous 4 years combined. The people who supported this economic plan should be proud of its early results. Proud. But everyone in this chamber should know and acknowledge that there is more to do. Next month, I will send you one of the toughest budgets ever presented to Congress. It will cut spending in more than 300 programs, eliminate 100 domestic programs, and reforms the ways in which governments buy goods and services. This year, we must again make the hard choices to live within the hard spending ceilings we have set. We must do it. We have proved we can bring the deficit down without choking off recovery, without punishing seniors or the middle class, and without putting our national security at risk. If you will stick with this plan, we will post 3 consecutive years of declining deficits for the first time since Harry Truman lived in the White House. And once again, the buck stops here. Our economic plan also bolsters our strength and our credibility around the world. Once we reduce the deficit and put the steel back into our competitive edge, the world echoed with the sound of falling trade barriers. In 1 year, with NAFTA, with GATT, with our efforts in Asia and the National Export Strategy, we did more to open world markets to American products than at any time in the last 2 generations. That means more jobs and rising living standards for the American people. Low deficits, low inflation, low interest rates, low trade barriers, and high investments. These are the building blocks of our recovery. But if we want to take full advantage of the opportunities before us in the global economy, you all know we must do more. As we reduce defense spending, I ask Congress to invest more in the technologies of tomorrow. Defense conversion will keep us strong militarily and create jobs for our people here at home. As we protect our environment, we must invest in the environmental technologies of the future, which will create jobs. This year, we will fight for a revitalized Clean Water Act and a Safe Drinking Water Act and a reformed Superfund program. And the Vice President is right. We must also work with the private sector to connect every classroom, every clinic, every library, every hospital in America into a national information superhighway by the year 2000. Think of it. Instant access to information will increase productivity, will help to educate our children, it will provide better medical care, it will create jobs. And I call on the Congress to pass legislation to establish that information superhighway this year. As we expand opportunity and create jobs, no one can be left out. We must continue to enforce fair lending and fair housing and all civil rights laws, because America will never be complete in its renewal until everyone shares in its bounty. But we all know, too, we can do all these things. Put our economic house in order, expand world trade, target the jobs of the future, guarantee equal opportunity. But if we're honest, we'll all admit that this strategy still cannot work unless we also give our people the education, training, and skills they need to seize the opportunities of tomorrow. We must set tough, world-class academic and occupational standards for all our children and give our teachers and students the tools they need to meet them. Our Goals 2000 proposal will empower individual school districts to experiment with ideas like chartering their schools to be run by private corporations or having more public school choice, to do whatever they wish to do as long as we measure every school by one high standard. Are our children learning what they need to know to compete and win in the global economy? Goals 2000 links world-class standards to grassroots reforms, and I hope Congress will pass it without delay. Our School to Work initiative will, for the first time, link school to the world of work, providing at least 1 year of apprenticeship beyond high school. After all, most of the people we're counting on to build our economic future won't graduate from college. It's time to stop ignoring them and start empowering them. We must literally transform our outdated unemployment system into a new re-employment system. The old unemployment system just sort of kept you going while you waited for your old job to come back. We've got to have a new system to move people into new and better jobs because most of those old jobs just don't come back. And we know that the only way to have real job security in the future, to get a good job with a growing income, is to have real skills and the ability to learn new ones. So we've got to streamline today's patchwork of training programs and make them a source of new skill for our people who lose their jobs. Re-employment, not unemployment, must become the centerpiece of our economic renewal. I urge you to pass it in this session of Congress. And just as we must transform our unemployment system, so must we also revolutionize our welfare system. It doesn't work. It defies our values as a nation. If we value work, we can't justify a system that makes welfare more attractive than work if people are worried about losing their health care. If we value responsibility, we can't ignore the $34 billion in child support absent parents ought to be paying to millions of parents who are taking care of their children. If we value strong families, we can't perpetuate a system that actually penalizes those who stay together. Can you believe that a child who has a child gets more money from the government for leaving home than for staying home with a parent or a grandparent? That's not just bad policy, it's wrong, and we ought to change it. I worked on this problem for years before I became president, with other governors and with members of Congress of both parties and with the previous administration of another party. I worked on it with people who were on welfare, lots of them. And I want to say something to everybody here who cares about this issue. The people who most want to change this system are the people who are dependent on it. They want to get off welfare, they want to go back to work, they want to do right by their kids. I once had a hearing when I was a governor, and I brought in people on welfare from all over America who had found their way to work. And the woman from my state who testified was asked this question. She said, what's the best thing about being off welfare in a job? And without blinking an eye, she looked at 40 governors and she said, when my boy goes to school and they say, what does your mother do for a living? He can give an answer. These people want a better system, and we ought to give it to them. Last year we began this. We gave the states more power to innovate because we know that a lot of great ideas come from outside Washington, and many states are already using it. Then this Congress took a dramatic step. Instead of taxing people with modest incomes into poverty, We help them to work their way out of poverty by dramatically increasing the earned income tax credit. It will lift 15 million working families out of poverty, rewarding work over welfare, making it possible for people to be successful workers and successful parents. Now that's real welfare reform. But there is more to be done. This spring, I will send you a comprehensive welfare reform bill that builds on the Family Support Act of 1988 and restores the basic values of work and responsibility. We'll say to teenagers, if you have a child out of wedlock, we'll no longer give you a check to set up a separate household. We want families to stay together. Say to absent parents who aren't paying their child support, if you're not providing for your children, we'll garnish your wages, suspend your license, track you across state lines, and if necessary, make some of you work off what you owe. People who bring children into this world cannot and must not walk away from them. But to all those who depend on welfare, we should offer ultimately a simple compact. We'll provide the support, the job training, the child care you need for up to 2 years. But after that, anyone who can work must, in the private sector wherever possible, in community service if necessary. That's the only way we'll ever make welfare what it ought to be, a second chance, not a way of life. Now, thank you. Thank you. I know it will be difficult to tackle welfare reform in 1994 at the same time we tackle health care. But let me point out, I think it is inevitable and imperative. It is estimated that 1 million people are on welfare today because it's the only way they can get health care coverage for their children. Those who choose to leave welfare for jobs without health benefits, and many entry-level jobs don't have health benefits, find themselves in the incredible position of paying taxes that help to pay for health care coverage for those who made the other choice to stay on welfare. No wonder people leave work and go back to welfare to get health care coverage. We got to solve the health care problem to have real welfare reform. So this year we will make history by reforming the health care system. And I would say to you, all of you, my fellow public servants, this is another issue where the people are way ahead of the politicians. That may not be popular with either party, but it happens to be the truth. You know, the First Lady has received now almost 1 million letters from people all across America and from all walks of life. I'd like to share just one of them with you. Richard Anderson of Reno, Nevada, lost his job and with it his health insurance. 2 weeks later, his wife Judy suffered a cerebral aneurysm. He rushed her to the hospital where she stayed in intensive care for 21 days. The Andersons billed for over $120,000. Although Judy recovered and Richard went back to work at $8 an hour, the bills were too much for them and they were literally forced into bankruptcy. Mrs. Clinton, he wrote to Hillary, no one in the United States of America should have to lose everything they worked for all their lives because they were unfortunate enough to become ill. It was to help the Richard and Judy Andersons of America that the First Lady and so many others have worked so hard and so long on this health care reform issue. We owe them our thanks and our action. I know there are people here who say there's no health care crisis. Tell it to Richard and Judy Anderson. Tell it to the 58 million Americans who have no coverage at all for some time each year. Tell it to the 81 million Americans with those pre-existing conditions. Those folks are paying more, or they can't get insurance at all, or they can't ever change their jobs because they or someone in their family has one of those pre-existing conditions. If you tell it to the small businesses burdened by skyrocketing costs of insurance, most small businesses cover their employees and they pay on average 35% more in premiums than big businesses or government. Or tell it to the 76% of insured Americans, 3 out of 4 whose policies have lifetime limits, and that means they can find themselves without any coverage at all just when they need it the most. So if any of you believe there's no crisis, you tell it to those people, because I can't. There are some people who literally do not understand the impact of this problem on people's lives. But all you have to do is go out and listen to them. Just go talk to them anywhere, in any congressional district in this country. There are Republicans and Democrats and independents. It doesn't have a lick to do with party. They think we don't get it. And it's time we show them that we do get it. From the day we began, our health care initiative has been designed to strengthen what is good about our health care system. The world's best health care professionals, cutting-edge research, and wonderful research institutions. Medicare for older Americans. None of it should be put at risk. But we're paying more and more money for less and less care. Every year, fewer and fewer Americans even get to choose their doctors. Every year, doctors and nurses spend more time on paperwork and less time with patients, because of the absolute bureaucratic nightmare the present system has become. This system is riddled with inefficiency, with abuse, with fraud, and everybody knows it. In today's healthcare system, insurance companies call the shots. They pick whom they cover and how they cover them. They can cut off your benefits when you need your coverage the most. They are in charge. What does it mean? It means every night millions of well-insured Americans go to bed just an illness, an accident, or a pink slip away from having no coverage or financial ruin. It means every morning millions of Americans go to work without any health insurance at all, something the workers in no other advanced country in the world do. It means that every year more and more hardworking people are told to pick a new doctor because their boss has had to pick a new plan. And countless others turn down better jobs because they know if they take the better job, they'll lose their health insurance. If we just let the healthcare system continue to drift, our country will have people with less care, fewer choices, and higher bills. Now, our approach protects the quality of care and people's choices. It builds on what works today in the private sector to expand employer-based coverage to guarantee private insurance for every American. And I might say, employer-based private insurance for every American was proposed 20 years ago by President Richard Nixon to the United States Congress. It was a good idea then, and it's a better idea today. Why do we want guaranteed private insurance? Because right now, 9 out of 10 people who have insurance get it through their employers, and that should continue. And if your employer is providing good benefits at reasonable prices, that should continue too. That ought to make the Congress and the President feel better. Our goal is health insurance everybody can depend on. Comprehensive benefits that cover preventive care and prescription drugs. Health premiums that don't just explode when you get sick or you get older. The power, no matter how small your business is, to choose dependable insurance at the same competitive rates governments and big business get today. One simple form for people who are sick. and most of all, the freedom to choose a plan and the right to choose your own doctor. Our approach protects older Americans. Every plan before the Congress proposes to slow the growth of Medicare. The difference is this: we believe those savings should be used to improve health care for senior citizens. Medicare must be protected, and it should cover prescription drugs, and we should take the first steps in covering long-term care. To those who would cut Medicare without protecting seniors, I say the solution to today's squeeze on middle-class working people's health care is not to put the squeeze on middle-class retired people's health care. We can do better than that. When it's all said and done, it's pretty simple to me. Insurance ought to mean what it used to mean. You pay a fair price for security, and when you get sick, health care is always there, no matter what. Along with the guarantee of health security, we all have to admit, too, there must be more responsibility on the part of all of us in how we use this system. People have to take their kids to get immunized. We should all take advantage of preventive care. We must all work together to stop the violence that explodes our emergency rooms. We have to practice better health habits, and we can't abuse the system. And those who don't have insurance under our approach will get coverage, but they'll have to pay something for it, too. The minority of businesses that provide no insurance at all, and in so doing, shift the cost of the care of their employees to others, should contribute something. People who smoke should pay more for a pack of cigarettes. Everybody can contribute something if we want to solve the health care crisis. There can't be any more something for nothing. It will not be easy, but it can be done. In the coming months, I hope very much to work with both Democrats and Republicans to reform a health care system by using the market to bring down costs and to achieve lasting health security. But if you look at history, we see that for 60 years this country's tried to reform health care. President Roosevelt tried, President Truman tried, President Nixon tried, President Carter tried. Every time, the special interests were powerful enough to defeat them, but not this time. I know that facing up to these interests will require courage. It will raise critical questions about the way we finance our campaigns and how lobbyists yield their influence. The work of change, frankly, will never get any easier until we limit the influence of well-financed interests who profit from this current system. So I also must now call on you to finish the job both houses began last year by passing tough and meaningful campaign finance reform and lobbying reform legislation this year. Thank you. You know, my fellow Americans, this is really a test for all of us. The American people provide those of us in government service with terrific health care benefits at reasonable cost. We have health care that's always there. I think we need to give every hardworking, tax-paying American the same health care security they have already given to us. I want to make this very clear. I am open, as I have said repeatedly, to the best ideas of concerned members of both parties. I have no special brief or any specific approach, even in our own bill, except this. If you send me legislation that does not guarantee every American private health insurance that can never be taken away, you will force me to take this pen, veto the legislation, and we'll come right back here and start all over again. But I don't think that's going to happen. I think we're ready to act now. I believe that you're ready to act now. And if you're ready to guarantee every American the same health care that you have, health care that can never be taken away, now, not next year or the year after, now is the time to stand with the people who sent us here. Now. As we take these steps together to renew our strength at home, we cannot turn away from our obligation to renew our leadership abroad. This is a promising moment because of the agreements we have reached this year, last year. Russia's strategic nuclear missiles soon will no longer be pointed at the United States, nor will we point ours at them. Instead of building weapons in space, Russian scientists will help us to build the International Space Station. Of course, there are still dangers in the world. Rampant arms proliferation, bitter regional conflicts, ethnic and nationalist tensions in many new democracies, severe environmental degradation the world over, and fanatics who seek to cripple the world's cities with terror. As the world's greatest power, we must therefore maintain our defenses and our responsibilities. This year, we secured indictments against terrorists and sanctions against those who harbor them. We worked to promote environmentally sustainable economic growth. We achieved agreements with Ukraine, with Belarus, with Kazakhstan to eliminate completely their nuclear arsenals. We're working to achieve a Korean peninsula free of nuclear weapons. We will seek early ratification of a treaty to ban chemical weapons worldwide. And earlier today, we joined with over 30 nations to begin negotiations on a comprehensive ban to stop all nuclear testing. But nothing is more important to our security than our nation's armed forces. We honor their contributions, including those who are carrying out the longest humanitarian airlift in history in Bosnia. Those who will complete their mission in Somalia this year, and their brave comrades who gave their lives there. Our forces are the finest military our nation has ever had, and I have pledged that as long as I am president, they will remain the best equipped, the best trained, and the best prepared fighting force on the face of the earth. Last year, I proposed a defense plan that maintains our post-Cold War security at a lower cost. This year, many people urged me to cut our defense spending further to pay for other government programs. I said no. The budget I send to Congress draws the line against further defense cuts. It protects the readiness and quality of our forces. Ultimately, the best strategy is to do that. We must not cut defense further. I hope the Congress, without regard to party, will support that position. Ultimately, the best strategy to ensure our security and to build a durable peace is to support the advance of democracy elsewhere. Democracies don't attack each other. They make better trading partners and partners in diplomacy. That is why we have supported, you and I, the democratic reformers in Russia and in the other states of the former Soviet bloc. I applaud the bipartisan support this Congress provided last year for our initiatives to help Russia, Ukraine, and the other states through their epic transformations. Our support of reform must combine patience for the enormity of the task and vigilance for our fundamental interests and values. We will continue to urge Russia and the other states to press ahead with economic reforms, and we will seek to cooperate with Russia to solve regional problems while insisting that if Russian troops operate in neighboring states, they do so only when those states agree to their presence and in strict accord with international standards. But we must also remember, as these nations chart their own futures, and they must chart their own futures, how much more secure and more prosperous our own people will be if democratic and market reforms succeed all across the former communist bloc. Our policy has been to support that move, and that has been the policy of the Congress. We should continue it. That is why I went to Europe earlier this month, to work with our European partners to help to integrate all the former communist countries into a Europe that has the possibility of becoming unified for the first time in its entire history, based on the simple commitments of all nations in Europe to democracy, to free markets, and to respect for existing borders. With our allies, we have created a partnership for peace that invites states from the former Soviet bloc and other non-NATO members to work with NATO in military cooperation. When I met with Central Europe's leaders, including Lech Wałęsa and Václav Havel, men who put their lives on the line for freedom, I told them that the security of their region is important to our country's security. This year, we must also do more to support democratic renewal and human rights and sustainable development all around the world. We will ask Congress to ratify the new GATT Accord. We will continue standing by South Africa as it works its way through its bold and hopeful and difficult transition to democracy. We will convene a summit of the Western Hemisphere's democratic leaders from Canada to the tip of South America. And we will continue to press for the restoration of true democracy in Haiti. And as we build a more constructive relationship with China, we must continue to insist on clear signs of improvement in that nation's human rights record. We will also work for new progress toward the Middle East peace. Last year, the world watched Yitzhak Rabin and Yasser Arafat at the White House when they had their historic handshake of reconciliation. But there is a long, hard road ahead. And on that road, I am determined that I and our administration will do all we can to achieve a comprehensive and lasting peace for all the peoples of the region. Now, there are some in our country who argue that with the Cold War, America should turn its back on the rest of the world. Many around the world were afraid we would do just that. But I took this office on a pledge that had no partisan tinge to keep our nation secure by remaining engaged in the rest of the world. And this year, because of our work together, enacting NAFTA, keeping our military strong and prepared, supporting democracy abroad, we have reaffirmed America's leadership, America's engagement, and as a result, the American people are more secure than they were before. But while Americans are more secure from threats abroad, I think we all know that in many ways we are less secure from threats here at home. Every day the national peace is shattered by crime. In Petaluma, California, an innocent slumber party gives way to agonizing tragedy for the family of Polly Klaas. An ordinary train ride on Long Island ends in a hail of 9mm rounds. A tourist in Florida is nearly burned alive by bigots simply because he is black. Right here in our nation's capital, a brave young man named Jason White, a policeman, the son and grandson of policemen, is ruthlessly gunned down. Violent crime and the fear it provokes are crippling our society, limiting personal freedom, and fraying the ties that bind us. The crime bill before Congress gives you a chance to do something about it, a chance to be tough and smart. What does that mean? Let me begin by saying I care a lot about this issue. Many years ago, when I started out in public life, I was the Attorney General of my state. I served as a governor for 12 years. I know what it's like to sign laws increasing penalties, to build more prison cells, to carry out the death penalty. I understand this issue, and it is not a simple thing. First, we must recognize that most violent crimes are committed by a small percentage of criminals who too often break the laws even when they're on parole. Now, those who commit crimes should be punished, and those who commit repeated violent crimes should be told, when you commit a third violent crime, you will be put away and put away for good. 3 strikes and you are out. Second, we must take serious steps to reduce violence and prevent crime, beginning with more police officers and more community policing. We know right now that police who work the streets, know the folks, have the respect of the neighborhood kids, focus on high crime areas. We know that they are more likely to prevent crime as well as catch criminals. Look at the experience of Houston, where the crime rate dropped 17% in 1 year when that approach was taken. Here tonight is one of those community policemen, a brave young detective, Kevin Jett, whose beat is 8 square blocks in one of the toughest neighborhoods in New York. Every day he restores some sanity and safety and a sense of values and connection to the people whose lives he protects. I'd like to ask him to stand up and be recognized tonight. Thank you, sir. You will be given a chance to give the children of this country, the law-abiding working people of this country, and don't forget, in the toughest neighborhoods in this country, in the highest crime neighborhoods in this country, the vast majority of people get up every day and obey the law, pay their taxes, do their best to raise their kids. They deserve people like Kevin Jett. And you're going to be given the chance to give the American people another 100,000 of them well-trained, and I urge you to do it. You have before you crime legislation which also establishes a police corps to encourage young people to get an education, pay it off by serving as police officers, which encourages retiring military personnel to move into police forces, an inordinate resource for our country. One which has a safe schools provision which will give our young people the chance to walk to school in safety and to be in school in safety instead of dodging bullets. These are important things. The third thing we have to do is to build on the Brady Bill, the Brady Law, to take further steps to keep guns out of the hands of criminals. I want to say something about this issue. Hunters must always be free to hunt. Law-abiding adults should always be free to own guns and protect their homes. I respect that part of our culture. I grew up in it. But I want to ask the sportsmen and others who lawfully own guns to join us in this campaign to reduce gun violence. I say to you, I know you didn't create this problem, but we need your help to solve it. There is no sporting purpose on earth that should stop the United States Congress from banishing assault weapons that outgun police and cut down children. Fourth, we must remember that drugs are a factor in an enormous percentage of crimes. Recent studies indicate, sadly, that drug use is on the rise again among our young people. The crime bill contains, all the crime bills contain, more money for drug treatment, for criminal addicts, and boot camps for youthful offenders that include incentives to get off drugs and to stay off drugs. Our administration's budget, with all its cuts, contains a large increase in funding for drug treatment and drug education. You must pass them both. We need them desperately. My fellow Americans, the problem of violence is an American problem. It has no partisan or philosophical element. Therefore, I urge you to find ways as quickly as possible to set aside partisan differences and pass a strong, smart, tough crime bill. But further, I urge you to consider this. As you demand tougher penalties for those who choose violence, let us also remember how we came to this sad point. In our toughest neighborhoods, on our meanest streets, in our poorest rural areas, we have seen a stunning and simultaneous breakdown of community, family, and work, the heart and soul of civilized society. This has created a vast vacuum which has been filled by violence and drugs and gangs. So I ask you to remember that even as we say no to crime, we must give people, especially our young people, something to say yes to. Many of our initiatives, from job training to welfare reform to health care to national service, will help to rebuild distressed communities, to strengthen families, to provide work. But more needs to be done. That's what our community empowerment agenda is all about. Challenging businesses to provide more investment through empowerment zones, ensuring banks will make loans in the same communities their deposits come from, passing legislation to unleash the power of capital through community development banks to create jobs, opportunity and hope where they're needed most. But I think you know that to really solve this problem, we'll all have to put our heads together, leave our ideological armor aside, and find some new ideas to do even more. And let's be honest, we all know something else too. Our problems go way beyond the reach of government. They're rooted in the loss of values, in the disappearance of work, and the breakdown of our families and our communities. My fellow Americans, we can cut the deficit, create jobs, promote democracy around the world, pass welfare reform and health care, pass the toughest crime bill in history, still leave too many of our people behind. The American people have got to want to change from within if we're going to bring back work and family and community. We cannot renew our country when within a decade, more than half of the children will be born into families where there has been no marriage. We cannot renew this country when 13-year-old boys get semi-automatic weapons to shoot 9-year-olds for kicks. We can't renew our country when children are having children and the fathers walk away as if the kids don't amount to anything. We can't renew the country when our businesses eagerly look for new investments and new customers abroad, but ignore those people right here at home who'd give anything to have their jobs and would gladly buy their products if they had the money to do it. We can't renew our country unless more of us, I mean all of us, are willing to join the churches and the other good citizens. People like all the black ministers I've worked with over the years, or the priests and the nuns I met at Our Lady of Help in East Los Angeles, or my good friend Tony Campolo in Philadelphia. Unless we're willing to work with people like that, people who are saving kids, adopting schools, making streets safer. All of us can do that. We can't renew our country until we realize that governments don't raise children, parents do. Parents who know their children's teachers and turn off the television and help with the homework and teach their kids right from wrong. Those kind of parents can make all the difference. I know. I had one. And I'm telling you, we have got to stop pointing our fingers at these kids who have no future and reach our hands out to them. Our country needs it, we need it, and they deserve it. And so I say to you tonight, let's give our children a future. Let us take away their guns and give them books. Let us overcome their despair and replace it with hope. Let us, by our example, teach them to obey the law, respect our neighbors, and cherish our values. Let us weave these sturdy threads into a new American community that can once more stand strong against the forces of despair and evil, because everybody has a chance to walk into a better tomorrow. Oh, there will be naysayers who fear that we won't be equal to the challenges of this time. But they misread our history, our heritage, even today's headlines. All those things tell us we can and we will overcome any challenge. When the earth shook and fires raged in California, when I saw the Mississippi deluge the farmlands of the Midwest in a 500-year flood, when the century's bitterest cold swept from North Dakota to Newport News, it seemed as though the world itself was coming apart at the seams. But the American people, they just came together. They rose to the occasion, neighbor helping neighbor, strangers risking life and limb to stay total strangers, showing the better angels of our nature. Let us not reserve the better angels only for natural disasters, leaving our deepest and most profound problems to petty political fighting. Let us instead be true to our spirit, facing facts, coming together, bringing hope, and moving forward. Tonight, my fellow Americans, we are summoned to answer a question as old as the Republic itself. What is the state of our union? It is growing stronger, but it must be stronger still. With your help and God's help, it will be. Thank you, and God bless America.
With some poignant words at the end about family and about children and renewal, President Clinton has just given an energetic and sweeping review of his accomplishments during his first year in office. As you can see, he's making his way out of the House chamber now. And he also spoke about his aspirations for the coming year, from welfare reform to health care, where the president said he will veto, he flat said he will veto any health care reform legislation that does not guarantee every American private health insurance, in his words, that can never be taken away. He spoke about crime legislation. He spoke briefly about international policy priorities. He spoke at the end about a breakdown of community and family and work. Overall, it was a broad and ambitious, a mostly domestically focused address, and by my count, it was interrupted over the hour and 3 minutes that we think it lasted, at least 63 times. The president continues to make his way out of the chamber, and as he does, we want to bring in our White House correspondent, Wolf Blitzer. Wolf, how much of this speech was Bill Clinton himself, and how much of it was the speechwriters at the White House?
Well, I think it's fair to say, Judy, that most of the speech was certainly Bill Clinton. He has delivered many of these words on previous occasions, but certainly not during a prime time audience. And he wanted to make it clear that these were his central messages as he goes into his second year. The section in the end when he was talking about values, most of that he said in similar words in the past few months in Memphis, but that was on a Saturday, and he felt, his aides say, that he never got the exposure for that speech that he certainly thought it deserved, to try to pin responsibility on people, not just on the government. All of the section on health care reform was basically a repeat of what he said in the past. Certainly there were no major breakthroughs in his international affairs section. He repeated some of the themes that he's been stressing over these past few weeks, but there's certainly no doubt that the centerpiece, as billed, of this speech was health care reform, the president wanting to make certain that this is the year of health care, and he stipulated that while at the same time he will try to implement some welfare reform, that is going to take second place. In the spring only there will be formal legislation. For now, though, health care will be number one on the initiative.
All right, Wolf Blitzer at the White House, thanks. Bernie?
Thank you, Judy. When we come back, the Republicans' turn. We'll have the official Grand Ole Party response to President Clinton's State of the Union address.
I think the president has re-engaged the Congress and the American public on the issue of health care and probably will have some success with it.
Andrea Mitchell, what are they saying at the White House in terms of when they expect to get some kind of health care legislation? And can the president hold true to his threat to send it back if it does not guarantee universal coverage, and perhaps it guarantees only universal access to coverage?
They are saying that that is the line that he's drawing tonight. It is a
variety of different ways. I hope you'll share it with us. We'll be back in just a moment.
ABC News coverage of the President's State of the Union address and the Republican response will continue in a moment.
Let's go to the Hill and our man Bob Franken.
Well, Bernie, just about everybody looks at last year, as drama-filled as it was, as the opening act, with health care reform being the center point of this year. This is going to be the big test. Of course, it's going to be a major undertaking to undo this massively complex health care system. President Clinton's most dramatic moment probably came this evening when he held up his pen and threatened to veto if he did not get a health care reform package that he could live with. Let us not forget that the Democrats in particular and the president have bragged repeatedly that they went through the year without one presidential veto. So when Bill Clinton holds up his pen and says he is ready to make a veto of health care legislation that he doesn't like, that has to be quite a threat that has to be taken quite seriously. So health care, as Wolf said, is the center point of the year. Welfare reform is a distant second, if that. Perhaps crime is second. Of course, crime is such a confused situation up here. It's going to be difficult to see exactly what kind of legislation is going to come out.
Bob, were you struck by the president's avoidance of the phrase universal coverage? Never once in that section did he talk about universal coverage. He said, if the legislation you send me does not guarantee every American private health insurance.
Well, of course, right now we have a variety of health care plans up here. They range from single payer, which would be the Canadian style, which of course would provide the universal coverage under the auspices of the government. But the criticism has been from conservatives that what President Clinton is proposing is in effect some sort of socialized system. He wants to back away from that. He realizes that he's going to have to compromise a lot. So when he avoids phrases like that, that's really a little bit of an olive branch to those with whom he's going to have to compromise.
And quickly, because we're less than a minute away from Senator Bob Dole's response, the Republican from Kansas, what about this idea of linkage, welfare and health insurance reform?
Well, of course, that linkage was provided by the chairman of the Senate Finance Committee, Pat Moynihan. Welfare reform, of course, has been a pet issue of his just about since he's been in public office. So that linkage was provided by a man who he must have on his side if he's going to get either health reform or welfare reform.
Do you think he won any Republican converts tonight?
This is an election year. I don't think this is a year when you win converts on the other side of the issue, on the other side of the aisle. What you hope to do is to come up with some sort of program which will make both sides happy and get them some political advantage. Bernie?
Okay, now let's go to Senator Dole.
Good evening. I'm Bob Dole, the Senate Republican leader. Tonight I'm speaking for congressional Republicans, for Republican governors, state legislators, mayors, and other elected officials. And I hope for you, if you believe as we do that America's taxes should be lower, that the government should spend less, that the people, not the government, should control more, and that our armed forces must be strong. Now here in Congress, we're the minority party. The Democrats have many more votes than we do in both the House and the Senate. So when the President spoke tonight, and he did a good job, he knew that whatever he really wants, he stands a good chance of getting because most Democrats will vote with him. And when Republicans believe President Clinton is moving America in the right direction, as he did with the North American Free Trade Agreement, then he can count on our votes and our cooperation too. But far more often than not, the President and his Democrat majority have taken what we believe is the wrong fork in the road, not just on one or two matters of policy, but on their entire approach to government. And health care is a good example. The President and Mrs. Clinton deserve credit for starting the debate. It has been very helpful. Now, nearly a year later, we really better understand this most important issue. We know that America has the best health care system in the world, that people from every corner of the globe come here when they need the very best treatment, and that our goal should be to ensure that every American has access to this system. Of course, there are many Americans with a sick child or sick parent in real need, both in rural and urban America. Our country has health care problems, but not a health care crisis. But we will have a crisis if we take the President's medicine, a massive overdose of government control. How massive? My colleague, Senator Arlen Specter of Pennsylvania, has prepared a chart of what the health care bureaucracy would look like under the President's plan. And I'd like to show you this chart. It's a great big chart. It contains 207 boxes. It would take a long time to fully explain it, and frankly, I have difficulty understanding it myself. Let me point out some of the new bureaucracies that the President's plan will create. Way up here is the National Health Board. Over here is the Advisory Commission on Regional Variations of Health Expenditures. And here's the National Institute for Healthcare Workforce Development. Now, you and I are way down here, way at the bottom. I don't know why we're not at the top, but we're at the bottom. Now, the President's idea is to put a mountain of bureaucrats between you and your doctor. For example, if you or a family member want to receive care from a specialist or a clinic outside your own state, let's say you live in Kansas, you want to go to Minnesota, then you probably can't do it without asking for approval. And under his plan, information about your health and your treatment can be sent to a national data bank without your approval. And that's a compromise of privacy none of us should accept. Now, these are just two examples, but there are many, many more. Clearly, the President is asking you to trust the government more than you trust your doctor and yourselves with your lives and the lives of your loved ones. More cost, less choice, more taxes, less quality, more government control, and less control for you and your family. That's what the President's government-run plan is likely to give you. Now, we can fix our most pressing problems without performing a triple bypass operation on our health care system. We can do it without the estimated $1 trillion gap, yes, $1 trillion gap between the administration's own projections, their projections of spending under the plan, and the funds available to pay for it. And we can do it now. Republicans, and I believe many, many Democrats, are ready to vote for legislation containing some common sense solutions. Solutions like guaranteeing interrupted coverage to everyone who is insured, even if you leave or lose your job, and guaranteeing that your coverage cannot be denied because of a serious illness or a pre-existing condition. Giving relief to small businesses by allowing them to join together to buy insurance, that lowers the rates, that saves them money. Giving individuals like yourselves who buy their own insurance 100% tax deduction. Changing the law to allow you to open your own medical savings account or to buy what we refer to or call medical IRAs. And helping uninsured low-income Americans pay for coverage through tax credits or vouchers. And finally, cutting government red tape and reforming medical malpractice laws that make our health care system so expensive. A debate on the President's massive and complex program will continue for most of the year, but the changes I just mentioned can be made now. So why wait? Why not act to put you and your family in control of your health care right now? This evening, the President also spoke at length about crime. And he's right. We all must take responsibility as individuals. And after years of debate, many Democrats are now joining Republicans behind this view. Criminals are not the victims of society. Society is the victim of criminals. And the best way to make America's streets and schools and homes safer is to put violent criminals in jail and to keep them there. And most provisions of this bill do just that. It passed the Senate last November by a vote of 94-4. Now let me give you just a few examples. Life imprisonment for those convicted of 3 violent felonies. Call it 3 strikes and you're in. You're in for life. Tough, mandatory sentences for those who use a gun in the commission of a crime. Violent juveniles will be treated as adults when they use a gun in a crime. But as you know very well, just putting criminals behind bars is not enough. There is a big, big second step, and that's padlocking the revolving door, keeping violent criminals in jail for their entire sentence. A 20-year sentence should mean just that. 20 years or darn close to it. Not 5, not 10, not even 15. So this bill would authorize 10 new regional prisons, federal prisons. But before states can send their violent criminals to those prisons, they must adopt truth in sentencing laws. In other words, if you do the crime, you're really going to do the time. Now, the Senate has passed tough crime bills before. But every time we do, liberal congressional Democrats remove the toughest provisions. And that must not happen again. Republicans want President Clinton to sign the toughest bill possible, and I've got the toughest bill around this town in my hands right now. Here it is. Here it is. We hope the House passes it. We hope the Senate, the President will sign it. Now, the President used some tough language tonight, and that's good. But will he follow through, and will he act on it? Will he insist on the tough provisions, like 10 new regional federal prisons, like truth in sentencing laws, like tough mandatory sentences for using a gun, and the death penalty for drug kingpins? Unfortunately, the administration has damaged its credibility on the crime issue by cutting the federal prison construction budget by 20% and by the 94% cut in the drug czar's office. And yes, the talk in the administration of legalizing drugs doesn't help much either. Now, many people are confused when the President's actions appear different than his words. For example, the President talks about education, but he opposes school choice, which could give parents more control over the education of their children. He promised to end welfare as we know it, yet everyone waits for his proposal. In the meantime, Republicans here in Congress and Republican governors across the nation are fighting for changes that make work and self-sufficiency and reducing illegitimacy top priorities. The President promised a middle-class tax cut, yet he and his party imposed the largest tax increase in American history. This $255 billion tax increase was opposed by every Republican in the House and in the Senate. We hope his higher taxes will not cut short the economic recovery and declining interest rates that he inherited. The 2-year mark, coming at the end of this year, is when the economy usually starts to feel the results of a new administration's policies. Now, instead of stifling growth and expansion through higher taxes and increased government regulations, Republicans would take America in a different direction. And we can do that through alternatives that reward risk-taking and the creation of new jobs, and that give our small businessmen and women relief from the heavy hand of government. Well, the President told you tonight that the deficit is projected to decrease next year, and that's true. After all, the largest tax increase in American history would decrease any deficit temporarily. But in the words of Paul Harvey, I want to tell you the rest of the story. Under his budget, government spending will increase by at least $343 billion in the next 5 years. And in the same time period, the nonpartisan, let me repeat, the nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office projects that $1 trillion will be added to our national debt. Now, the one place the President has cut drastically is precisely the wrong place: national security, slashed to the lowest level since before Pearl Harbor. History tells us, and many of us know firsthand, that America cannot afford to have a hollow military, nor can we afford to let the United Nations dictate what is in America's national interest. But I want to close tonight by talking about America, the greatest country on the face of the earth. I believe America has an enduring mission, a mission of leadership. 50 years ago, when Hitler's tyranny was on the march, it was only because of strong American leadership that freedom was preserved. In the Cold War, for millions behind the Iron Curtain, and in the many nations that depended on us to protect them, it was, again, only because of strong American leadership that freedom prevailed. And now, as countries that were tyrannies learn democracy, as people learn about free markets where a short time ago buying and selling without the state's permission was illegal, the world again waits and wants strong and needs strong American leadership so that freedom will endure. You know, many times over the past few years, right here in this office in the Capitol, I've met with representatives from the new emerging democracies. Some were leaders of their countries, some were ordinary citizens. Some had been in jail for many years for just speaking out in public. And they all told me about the same thing, some with tears in their eyes, some could hardly speak. And they all said, "We want to be like America." That's what they said. We want to be like America. In this great, good, and generous nation, the American mission endures here at home and around the world. We are its stewards, and it's up to us to ensure that wherever the road divides, that America takes the right path, remains true to our mission of leadership, and remains the light and the hope of humanity. Thank you, and to the people of Southern California, please know that all of us in Washington will be working with Governor Wilson and your congressional delegation to provide the help you need. And if you'd like a copy of this chart, just write Senator Arlen Specter, care of the Capitol, Washington, D.C. Thank you, and good night.
The Republican response from the Republican leader in the Senate, Bob Dole of Kansas. When we come back, reaction and the thoughts of an advisor to President Clinton and a former Republican Labor Secretary.
We're going to discuss crime and the politics of crime when we come back. Hope you'll stay with us.
ABC News coverage of the President's State of the Union address and the Republican response will continue in a moment.
These days, people who really understand money carry the discovery. CNN.
Just ahead on Inside Politics, a post-mortem on the President's State of the Union address. One speech, at least two interpretations, and the truth, perhaps somewhere in between. We'll have reaction from Democrats and Republicans and a check of the facts.
In 1987, he was an object of congressional hearings. In 1994, he's running for the Senate. We'll look at Oliver North's transformation from the Iran-Contra affair to Republican Party hopeful in Virginia. Those stories ahead on Inside Politics, right after this business news update.
This is Inside Politics with Bernard Shaw and Judy Woodruff in Washington.
Thanks for joining us. In his first State of the Union address, President Clinton urged the American people to join him on a journey of renewal to confront the issues of crime, welfare, and health care. But it could be a rough trip. CNN's Wolf Blitzer joins us now with a look at reaction to the ambitious domestic agenda and the political fight ahead.
Bernie, it's the day after the president's address before a joint session of Congress, and the highly charged Republican response suggests tough partisan battles are looming.
Now is the time to stand with the people who sent us here. Now.
The physical strain of speaking for more than an hour proved too much. A hoarse voice forced the president to cancel his public appearances for at least 2 days.
He did see the doctor briefly this morning, who just said it was simply a question of overuse and recommended that he rest it today, that he not speak too much, which is a challenge.
This speech also generated political strains, with Republicans taking the offensive against Mr. Clinton's health care plan and his commitment to fighting crime.
But I'm reminded of the words often heard in this chamber and around the world: actions speak louder than words.
Before losing his voice, he took 2 calls on the so-called White House comment line. Officials say both calls were positive. But even without a voice, Mr. Clinton met with Democratic congressional leaders.
I think we're going to pass a major health care reform in this Congress, and I think the public will support that indeed.
But Treasury Secretary Lloyd Benson signaled some fresh flexibility. In the face of pressure, he suggested the administration may now be willing to let companies with fewer than 5,000 employees avoid having to join their proposed regional health alliances.
We hear you. We're willing to discuss this one and the other details of our plan.
And Representative John Dingell says the president's bottom line demand for universal coverage could be phased in over a longer period of time.
How we get from where we are to where that would be is, I think, a matter which is open to friendly negotiation.
But when it comes to Mr. Clinton's tough talk on fighting crime, Republicans suggested it was hollow, citing last year's cut in prison funding.
So we just suggest the president touched on crime. He really didn't get tough on crime, and we think there's still an opportunity.
But White House officials say the new budget will include increased funding.
Well, we need to build more prisons, and that's part of the president's plan as well, to have boot camps. I think people are fed up with crime today, and
The president addressed Congress twice last year. Both times he succeeded in generating public support, only to see that momentum fade within weeks. This time, White House officials insist they won't allow that to happen. Bernie?
Well, take us back to the speech last night. At one point, with a bit of drama, the president held up a black pen. He threatened to use that pen to veto health care reform if it does not contain basic things he wants. What's the story behind that?
Well, there was a big debate within the White House whether or not the president should make that flat veto threat. Many officials here were concerned that moderate Democrats, conservative Republicans, would be very, very angry with an all-out threat like that. But the president felt, and certainly the First Lady felt, that that is the bottom line, universal coverage, and there can't be any health care reform unless Congress goes along with the president on that proposal. They're willing to compromise on other things, but not on that. But there has already been an angry reaction among even some moderate Democrats who think it's simply too expensive and the way to achieve it is too difficult.
Thank you. Wolf Blitzer at the White House. Judy?
The facts and figures to back up the arguments flew fast and furious last night during both the president's address and Senator Bob Dole's reply. And in some cases, as it turns out, liberties were taken with the truth. CNN's Jean Meserve pulled together this fact check to set a few things straight.
There were very few outright lies in last night's speeches, but there were more than a few half-truths. Among the whoppers:
We can fix our most pressing problems without performing a triple bypass operation on our health care system. We can do it without the estimated $1 trillion gap, yes, $1 trillion gap, between the administration's own projections, their projections of spending under the plan, and the funds available to pay for it.
Well, Senator, the bipartisan Congressional Budget Office says there is no reliable estimate of how much the Clinton health care plan will cost. Among the half-truths and distortions:
tell it to the 58 million Americans who have no coverage at all for some time each year. Tell it to the 81 million Americans with those pre-existing conditions. Those folks are paying more, or they can't get insurance at all, or they can't ever change their jobs.
It's true that 58 million are without insurance for some part of the year, but often only for a few weeks as they switch jobs. The number of hardcore uninsured is much smaller. As for the claim that 81 million Americans have pre-existing conditions, impartial experts say they have never seen such a number and that it defies logic.
My colleague, Senator Arlen Specter of Pennsylvania, has prepared a chart of what the health care bureaucracy would look like under the president's plan. And I'd like to show you this chart. It's a great big chart. It contains 207 boxes
The chart may be accurate, but healthcare experts say a flow chart of Republican proposals or the present system would be even more complicated.
Only the top one, listen. The top 1.2% of Americans, as I said all along, will pay higher income tax rates.
Yes, Mr. President, but how about the increase in the gas tax and the new surcharges on some small businesses?
He and his party imposed the largest tax increase in American history.
Technically true, but if dollars are adjusted for inflation, the very largest tax increase was passed by a Republican, Ronald Reagan, in 1982. Because this sort of fact-checking story has become the norm after major speeches, an aide to the president says the White House deleted numbers it could not substantiate. Nonetheless, neither the president nor Senator Dole told the whole truth, nothing but the truth. Jean Meserve, CNN, Washington.
Well, whether or not the numbers add up, the bigger question may be how the president's address is being received by the American people. Next on Inside Politics, a discussion with National Public Radio correspondent Mara Eliason and E.J. Dionne of the Washington Post.
Want to read? From masterful to Reagan-esque to just plain long. So we've invited two experienced political journalists to join us with their assessments of the President's State of the Union. Mara Eliason, White House correspondent for National Public Radio, and E.J. Dionne, author and columnist for the Washington Post. E.J., I'm going to start with you. How does it all look and sound by the light of the next day?
During the election campaign in 1992, somebody traveling around the country in the Clinton campaign entourage kept track of how much he talked and estimated that on one average day of running for president, he spoke 40,000 words. Well, he does like to talk, so much so that this week, after his State of the Union message, he lost his voice. Before he lost it, he talked through a list of legislation long enough to keep Congress in session for months or years. Some background from Jack Smith. Jack?
David, this week, as he surveyed his accomplishments his first year in office, the president seemed to like what he saw. Deficit reduction, gun control, family leave.
All passed, all signed into law with not one single veto.
And as he looked into the future, there were some surprises. On health care reform, a threat if coverage isn't universal.
You will force me to take this pen, veto the legislation, and we'll come right back here and start all over again.
On welfare reform, the announcement he'll risk tackling health care and welfare simultaneously.
I think it is inevitable and imperative.
And on crime, unexpected toughness from a Democrat and strong endorsement for life in prison for repeat violent offenders.
3 strikes and you are out.
It was all music to the ears of the visiting nation's mayors, especially the push for a new federal crime bill.
We're going to start taking pictures with our Congress people, and we're going to start talking issues. If they can't give us what the people want, then they need not come home for the votes.
But federal bills have little impact on the street violence that's scaring voters. By some calculations, less than 2% of violent crime falls under federal jurisdiction. And in Mayor Sharp's city, Newark, for instance, the most recent infusion of federal assistance, more than $1 million, only paid for 24 new officers to fill a handful of slots in the city's 1,200-strong force.
We'll probably get more police officers a day, probably 6 or 7.
Crime and welfare reform, both are on the president's legislative agenda on Capitol Hill. But most of the fire in the president's State of the Union was devoted to health care reform. And as expected, it quickly drew criticism.
Let me point out some of the new bureaucracies that the president's plan will create.
That chart tells it in one glance.
Republican Senator Arlen Specter of Pennsylvania, whose staff prepared the chart.
It brings big government into a relationship which is very personal, doctor and patient.
Republicans are slamming the Clinton plan as a bureaucratic nightmare and also denying there's a health care crisis. But you can't beat something with nothing, and so the president not only seemed to be stealing the old Republican issues of crime and welfare, but was also walking away with the health issue, too. Until, that is, this man came along.
We want to hold down health care costs. And
Tennessee Democrat Jim Cooper has become a major aggravation for the White House, unveiling his own health care reform plan and in the 4 months since, garnering more bipartisan support than the president has for his plan.
Sometimes we call my bill Clinton Light. Tastes great, less filling.
Like Clinton's, Cooper's plan puts consumers in giant insurance purchasing alliances, sort of insurance price clubs that shop around for the best deal. But unlike the Clinton plan, there are no controls on insurance premiums, no mandates that employers pay 80% of the premiums, and no universal coverage, just better access to health care. And because it seems to be stealing the middle ground they once occupied, Clinton supporters are angry with Cooper.
Cooper's plan does not guarantee health benefit coverage that cannot be taken away from you at any point in your life. It makes no pretense of even guaranteeing it, much less producing on it.
But the Cooper plan looks good to many because there's real opposition to the Clinton plan. In Texas, for instance, where undocumented aliens crowd emergency rooms and raise costs, hospital administrators oppose price controls.
And I'm concerned, as I think all hospital executives are, that we've gotten to the point where there isn't any more to cut. And we're going to start having to reduce some of those important services that we provide to our patients.
And small businesses, many of whom can't afford to provide insurance, strongly oppose employer mandates and say they'll fight.
There's absolutely going to be a huge fight. General Motors and a couple other companies might get a great deal out of this thing, but the smallest firms in the economy are going to be badly hurt.
The president will have a hard time overcoming the special interests and congressional critics lining up against him unless he reaches outside Washington, not only to the mayors, but also to the governors who are meeting here for their semi-annual conference and taking a hard look at some of the very same issues that are in the Clinton agenda: welfare, crime, and health care. David?
Jack, thank you. Here with us are Governors Ann Richards of Texas, who was in the governor's mansion in Austin and soon to be on her way to the Super Bowl to see their Texas entry, and Christine Todd Whitman, Governor of New Jersey. We thank you both for coming.
Delighted.
Pleased to have you.
Thank you.
Here with us in the studio are George Will and Sam Donaldson, both of ABC News. Now, it's unusual for anyone to run against George Bush's son, for a young... What did you think of the what did you think of the State of the Union speech, Governor Richards?
Well, it was important for us to have the president really lay down what was the bottom line for him. Undoubtedly, there are going to be areas that we disagree with. In Texas, we really do have a health care crisis. 26 cents of every dollar that is spent by a Texan for government is spent on Medicaid. And we have got to figure a way in which you've got coverage for everyone, but you don't decimate or cause serious harm to the business community. We led the nation 2 years in a row of job creation. Now, I don't want to see a health care plan that sets us back in the fact that 500,000 more people are working in Texas than they were 3 years ago. How you find that middle ground between the Cooper plan and between the president's health care plan is going to be the tough one. But I want to insist to you in welfare, let me say to you seriously, David, the welfare system is a disaster. It is broke. It has got to change. If you take the money that you are spending now on welfare and get rid of the bureaucracy that is surrounding it and teach people how to work, you're going to be all right.
Well, before we're all right, in the meantime, I want to bring in Governor Whitman of New Jersey and ask her the same question. What did you think of the State of the Union speech?
Well, I think the goals outlined were great, and most of the governors, a lot of what he said, and a lot of the proposals, program proposals on crime, on welfare, are things that many of the governors have already been doing. I've seen a lot of the Republican governors already initiate those kinds of reforms. In health care, we in New Jersey enacted a package, the Republican legislature last year, a 3-bill package that talked about portability of health care, that talked about limiting an insurance company's ability to exclude for pre-existing conditions. One of the things we found, though, and it's something you've got to be very careful of with this plan, is we also outlined 5 basic plans that everyone would have to buy into, and many of our small businesses are finding they're being forced to give up plans that they had for their employees that were less expensive than what's being offered by in the 5 put forward by the state. and offers less coverage to their employees, and that's not what the object of the whole reform was about. So you got to be very careful when you start mandating at a federal level what the options are, because often you get unintended consequences, and if you don't have flexibility in there for the states to respond as they really need to cover their particular situation, we're going to have a lot of hurting people right now.
Governor Richards, you mentioned job creation, and that's been part of Governor Whitman's agenda in her early days. Tell me what you think of the employer mandate, which is one of the crucial distinctions between the President's plan and the Cooper plan. Are you in favor of paying for health care with a new mandate on businesses?
Well, what I think has to be done is that businesses have to be given the opportunity to opt into various insurance systems, but there is going to be a timing mechanism, I'm convinced, that is injected into this debate so that nothing happens overnight. You are not going to be able to ask business to bear the burden of instantly taking over insurance when that insurance is not being paid for them now. The most important thing, I think, is to be flexible in this plan so that employers have an opportunity coupled with employees to buy insurance that is affordable, and the affordability question is the big one.
Governor Whitman, Governor Richards indicates that it's partly the pace and the degree of the mandate. Other people think the mandate is just a job-destroying idea, period. Where do you stand?
Well, it's a real concern, and we tried to build in the legislation that was passed in New Jersey some form of payment and support by the state government, but it's clear that in that we could move very quickly to a hidden employer tax, and that obviously is of great concern, particularly to small business. And we've got to understand that the majority of job creation for the future is going to be with the small businesses. So I have real concerns about that part of it. You know what we've got to look at? And I know the Republicans get hit for saying that there's not a health care crisis. There's a health insurance crisis. Health care in this country is very good. I mean, we have high standards of health care. For those people who can't get it because of insurance, they have a real crisis, and that's where we need to be focusing our attention on the insurance aspect of it.
Let me ask both of you a political judgment about the health care issue. Governor Whitman, you've just finished a campaign. Governor Richards, you're just starting one. It does seem that as information about the Clinton plan gets disseminated, support for the plan becomes softer and indeed falls. Suppose that legislation were put in to guarantee two things: portability of health insurance programs and an end to preconditions that prevent people from getting insurance. Suppose those two things were done quickly, which could be done in about 1,300 pages fewer than the Clinton bill. How much, beginning with you, Governor Whitman, how much steam would be left in the sense of health care crisis in the country?
Well, I think those two things are critically important, but you still have a whole lot of people. You need to do some other insurance reforms, I believe. For kids who are coming out of college before they get their first job, when they may have moved off their parents' system, they still haven't picked up a job, so they don't have coverage yet. But those things can be addressed without having a huge federal bureaucracy put in place to try to run health care.
Governor Richards, what's your political judgment?
I think that there's going to be a health care bill passed this year. What form it eventually will take, I don't know. But David, it is very important to point out to you that the people are paying for everyone's health care now. The question is how it's paid for. They're paying for it in taxes. For anyone who doesn't have insurance or for anyone who needs health care, they appear at our hospitals, they use those services, and we pay for it in taxes. Now, the whole issue of health care reform and how it's going to be done is really whether you're going to pay an insurance and you're going to cover everyone, or you're going to pay for it in taxation. I don't personally think that you're going to be able to pass any kind of bill that is going to cause job loss, because none of us are going to stand for it. We've worked too hard.
I want to talk about welfare reform and crime, and start with welfare reform. The President's plan is roughly, although we have no details yet, after 2 years, you get people off the welfare rolls. But the question then is, what happens then? I've seen estimates that if the government becomes the employer of last resort, it could add $20 billion a year to our present welfare expenditure, not save money. Governor Richards, have you seen those estimates? What do you think of them?
Yeah, but we have a plan in Texas, and I've been working at this for 2 years. It's in San Antonio, Texas, and the plan itself requires job training And at the same time, it is coupled with an actual job. We get the private sector employers to come up with the job and guarantee that that job is going to be available at the end of 2 years training. I think by 2 years
do you think
we're
that
going to have them
nationally,
off welfare.
do you think that nationally everybody who's now on welfare could find a job in 2 years and be trained for it?
I think that if you institute the programs by states, now if you try to do it by the federal government, I can't promise you anything. Because until they get their boot off the neck of the states, not much is going to happen.
You're sounding like
but if they free us up, and I'm sure Governor Whitman would agree, to create systems within the states, we can solve this welfare problem.
Wait, which one is the Republican here? Governor Whitman, try my question about welfare reform and the possibility that if the government has to supply the jobs, it adds money.
It's going to add a lot of money, but I agree with Governor Richards. I mean, we have got, the states have been taking initiatives. We've done a lot of welfare reform in New Jersey. My real concern is, personally, is 2 years and you're off the welfare. That's great if they're jobs. My job as a governor is to stimulate the economy, so we're creating jobs. And then we have done this through the REACH program in New Jersey, where we have been training people for jobs, giving them the support they need to be able to get to that training, whether it be they need transportation, or for women who need child care so that they can be comfortable their kids are being taken care of while they get their training. And then there are a lot of innovative programs that look at having them do some community service work for their welfare benefits after a certain period of time, once they've done their training.
Chamber.
We should mention that this is a constitutional requirement. The Constitution says
Mr. Speaker,
that the President has to deliver.
The President of the United States!
You're still here. You're still here.
Here we are. I think we just were here. I think we just got back.
How are you? Missed you the last time.
This guy will work the crowd.
Bill Schneider, why does this president feel that he, as a Democrat, has got to show the Republicans that he and his party are just as tough on crime as the Republicans?
Well, crime is the #1 issue facing the country. The Republicans think that the issue is a gift to them because they've always seen themselves as the tough on crime party, but Clinton has really tried to preempt this issue with some success. He supports the death penalty. Many Democrats, like Michael Dukakis, did not. He is for boot camps for first-time offenders. A lot of Democrats have gone out of their way to prove that they're new Democrats, like President Clinton. They take a different line, not the conventional liberal line on issues like crime, and they are stealing the issue right from under the Republicans' noses.
And the Republicans are not very happy about that.
No, indeed. In fact, one of them, Senator Phil Gramm, said the president's a phony on crime the other day.
We're going to hear the Speaker of the House formally announce the president to this chamber. At some point, you might see in the gallery, sitting next to First Lady Hillary Rodham Clinton, Tommy O'Neill. He's the eldest son of the former and late Speaker Thomas Tip O'Neill, who, as you know, died.
He's also a former Lieutenant Governor of Massachusetts.
That's sitting there, Bernie was pointing out, that next to Mrs. Clinton, Lane Kirkland, who's the head of the AFL-CIO, on her other side is the CEO of General Motors, Jack Smith.
And the diplomatic corps is seated to, let me see if I can remember quickly, to the president's left on the floor of the House chamber. They always are along the wall, right here in the foreground here, if my angle is correct here. They're right there, just to the left of the CNN logo there.
It's interesting that Lane Kirkland is there in the gallery with the First Lady because the organized labor constituency was very angry over NAFTA just a couple of months ago, but they supported.
This is CNN.
Storm clouds swirl outside this majestically lit United States Capitol. What began as a balmy evening here has turned into a typically frigid, rainy January night.
And a tempest may also be brewing inside as President Clinton reflects on a momentous first year in office and sets an ambitious agenda for 1994. This is a CNN special, President Clinton's first State of the Union address. Good evening from Washington. I'm Judy Woodruff.
And I'm Bernard Shaw. Bill Clinton likes to be known as a man of policy, willing to take on the issues, quick to delve into the details. And after combing through his programs, writing and rewriting, the president lays it all out for the American people.
The word from the White House is that this State of the Union message will be devoted primarily to the domestic issues that concern Americans the most: crime, welfare, health care, and the steadily growing U.S. economy. For a preview, we go first to CNN senior White House correspondent Wolf Blitzer. Wolf?
Judy, the president will begin the speech tonight by stressing his accomplishments this past year, specifically on the economy. He will take credit for some of the low budget numbers, the reduced deficit. Certainly, he will try to take credit for the low inflation rate and the low interest rates. But he will move quickly to the centerpiece of what is his administration's major initiative during the second year in office, namely health care reform. And he will insist that the country needs universal coverage, health care for everyone, affordable health care no one can take away. He will also stress a more popular issue right now, which namely is crime. And specifically, he will endorse the notion 3 strikes and you're out, meaning 3 violent felonies and you're never again going to be eligible for parole. On welfare reform, the president will insist that the country must end welfare, in his words, as we know it, and he will stipulate that for most welfare recipients, 2 years will be the limit. Finally, there will be a section on national security, international affairs. The president will try to stress how he's worked to promote democracy around the world, in Russia, in Central Europe, Eastern Europe. He will point to a democracy emerging in South Africa, the Arab-Israeli peace process. There won't be any discussion, though, of some of the foreign policy failures, Bosnia, Somalia, Haiti. Judy?
All right, thanks, Wolf. And we want you to continue to stand by, and we want to bring in Bob Franken, CNN's Capitol Hill correspondent. Bob, what are the members that you've been talking to expecting to hear tonight?
Well, first of all, what they're expecting to hear is a bit of self-congratulation. They really had, by the time the year was over, a fairly productive year last year.
Care, welfare reform, and he wants to make a lot of changes. So he has to say, we can't be complacent. There's still a lot of changes we need to make.
Can you tell us very briefly, Bill Schneider, why is it that the message health care reform we heard as Congress went out is a different message we're hearing as we come in?
Well, at the moment, the health...
Mr. Speaker, the Chief Justice of the United States and the Associate Justice of the Supreme Court.
We're going to hear some announcements, formal announcements of very important personages as they file into this chamber, and that the Supreme Court is just being announced by the House doorkeeper, Bill, indicates that we are some time away from hearing him say, Mr. Speaker, the President of the United States.
That's right. The Supreme Court is gathering. In fact, the entire government, that's all 3 branches of government, the Congress, the Supreme Court, the President, are all in one room. This is a rare occasion, once a year in American government. You were asking me before about the health care issue. It has changed its texture a bit in the 9 weeks since Congress went into recess. Health care last year was clearly a major crisis. It was one of the top issues facing the country. And in the last 9 or 10 weeks, I think the sense of crisis has diminished. There's a feeling of less pressure on Congress. 2 reasons. One is that the figures came out showing that inflation in health care costs is lower than it's been in 2 decades. So the situation is improving. And second of all, the economy seems to be recovering. The news from the last economic quarter was quite good. It was the recession of 1990 and 91 that created the healthcare crisis because so many Americans, particularly white-collar workers, were threatened with losing their jobs and their health care. And now that there seems to be a recovery moving ahead, the sense of crisis is diminishing, and the president needs to recreate that if he wants to get his health care plan passed.
All right, Bernie and I are just hearing that the president, who has been in a holding room just next to this chamber, is leaving the holding room and is now making his way to the chamber. And in a moment, we're going to hear, I think it's the Sergeant at Arms, is that right?
Mm-hmm.
Whose name is Werner Brandt, who's going to announce that the president is coming in. And all of this very much follows tradition for these joint sessions of Congress, which the president speaks at. As we've pointed out, this is the president's first formal State of the Union address, but he did speak to two joint sessions of Congress last year, one in February when he laid out his economic plan for the year, and the second one in September when he talked about health care. We think the announcement is about to come.
And as we await the announcement by the Sergeant at Arms announcing the President of the United States, always one member of the cabinet stays back, just in case, God forbid, there's something catastrophic that might happen in this.
Support the president on health care, and Lane Kirkland is very prominently in attendance tonight. Maybe they're ready to bury the hatchet.
Someone else who's prominently in attendance, Jim Brady, former press secretary to Ronald Reagan, who of course was shot the day President Reagan was shot. Jim Brady has been instrumental, he and his wife Sarah, in pushing through the handgun reform legislation we all know well now by the name the Brady Bill.
This is going to be a long one tonight.
Thank you very much. Members of Congress, I have the high privilege and the distinct honor of presenting to you the President of the United States. Thank you.
Well, Judy and Bill, clearly this president is anxious to go. He almost started his speech before he was introduced formally by the Speaker of the House.
Bill and Bernie, has a president ever come into that chamber and not been profusely applauded?
I can't remember any presidents who have been in a lot of trouble, and several recent ones were.
And the party that has the control of the White House yells loudest.
Thank you very much. Mr. Speaker, Mr. President, members of the 103rd Congress, my fellow Americans, I'm not at all sure what speech is in the teleprompter tonight, but I hope we can talk about the State of the Union. I ask you to begin by recalling the memory of the giant who presided over this chamber with such force and grace. Tip O'Neill liked to call himself a man of the house, and he surely was that. But even more, he was a man of the people, a bricklayer's son who helped to build the great American middle class. Tip O'Neill never forgot who he was, where he came from, or who sent him here. Tonight he's smiling down on us for the first time from the Lord's gallery. But in his honor, may we too always remember who we are, where we come from, and who sent us here. If we do that, we will return over and over again to the principle that if we simply give ordinary people equal opportunity, quality education, and a fair shot at the American dream, they will do extraordinary things. We gather tonight in a world of...
It was capped, of course, by the NAFTA success for the president. And then even as the session was closing, he was successful in getting the Brady Bill. You'll remember that, of course. Now he's moving on to the big ones. And that, of course, is highlighted, as Wolf said, by health care. That is everybody's priority up here this year. This is an election year, and basically everybody has decided that the election, their election, the success of each party is going to depend on how they handle the health care issue. Of course, there's a Clinton health care proposal. There are a variety of other proposals. Remember, probably the most serious competitor to the Clinton health care proposal comes from a Democrat. Actually, it's a coalition of conservative Democrats and Republicans. It's the Jim Cooper health care plan, which, as I said, is probably the most serious competitor to health care. The other issue that has forced its way to the forefront is crime. Both parties are going to be trying to outdo each other to look tough on crime. The problem is there are really a variety of proposals out there and a variety of philosophies about what to do about crime. There are those who want to emphasize punishment. There are those who would like to emphasize rehabilitation and the social issues. So crime and health care are going to be the two things which the members probably feel that they're going to have to do something about this year. As we can see, the chamber is filling slowly as they get ready for the president to deliver his State of the Union address. We are hearing that the president might be a little late. We're not exactly sure of the reason, but this is really quite a massive event. When the Capitol becomes swarming with police, you have just about every dignitary in the Western world, it seems, going into one room. That is the House of Representatives chamber. We're expecting now to hear about a 1-hour address. Then what will begin, which should be a long congressional session, really focusing mainly on two issues, as I said, health care and crime.
All right, thanks, Bob Franken, and we know you'll be standing by too. And I guess, Bernie, what we're also hearing is that some of the delay that may happen right now has to do with the difficulty in getting people into the chamber and taking their seats. There is some rough weather outside here.
Rough weather indeed, Judy, and for all of our viewers, as you know in our coverage of the State of the Union addresses, normally we talk for a little while and go right to the president. As Judy indicated, this chamber is slow to fill up tonight. It's yucky outside, to be quite blunt about it. And these guests are in the gallery, left-hand side of your screen. Lane Kirkland, president of the AFL, the CIO, and that's very interesting that he's there. We're going to call in our public opinion analyst, Bill Schneider, and as we do, we'll tell you the president is on time. He's in a holding room. They're waiting for the chamber to fill up. Bill, there's an interesting battle going on in this Capitol tonight. It seems to be a battle for the minds and the support of the American voters.
Well, that's right, and I think we're going to hear the president veer between one message in which he points with pride towards all of his achievements. The other message is that he views with alarm all the problems we have out there. He's going to have to seek a balance between those two messages. He wants to point with pride to say it's working. The program is in place. We have to stay the course, to quote Ronald Reagan, which I don't think he will do, and continue the program that we've set. He wants to view with alarm because he still has a big agenda.